There are approximately 36 million trees being cut down in the US every year, and the wood is considered unusable by the lumber industry. So it's either burned or thrown away into landfill. This was one of the reasons why Theo Hooker decided to start Cambium Carbon, a company that's making the timber supply chain more transparent with their innovative trace technology, while also creating a technical solution for turning all of that unusable wood into the world's most sustainable wood. It's called Carbon Smart Wood. Check out this episode to learn about Cambium Carbon's unique approach to solving a major environmental challenge. Hey Theo, thanks very much for joining us on the Sustainability Champions podcast. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Daniel. Great to be here. Excited to chat.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to learning about Cambium Carbon. And the way I like to start these conversations is really with a big picture point of view. So what is Cambium Carbon?
Cambium Carbon is on a mission to create regenerative supply chains and address the multitude of environmental and social challenges associated with our supply chains right now. Right now, we're focusing on fallen lumber. So basically anything outside what you would call the traditional lumber industry that doesn't get used, whether that's tossed into landfills, turned into mulch, in some cases burned because it's easy to get rid of, and that's where the incentives lie. But really, from a top level perspective, addressing how we source and utilize materials across our economy, across our society.
So, and the word regenerative or the term regenerative supply chain sounds really interesting that I'm interested in understanding. But before we go into that specific point, it sounds like you're basically finding uses for wood that is otherwise unusable, traditionally speaking.
Correct. Right. And we've branded that carbon smart wood
Okay.
as this material that is carbon smart. It is, would be destined for a landfill. We're giving it a second life. And not only that, but we are using our supply chain technology called Trace to provide tracking, carbon metrics, and impact metrics across that supply chain to ensure where this material comes from, what we say it is in fact irrefutable.
Okay. That's so very cool. So there are lots to talk about here. So first, um, in terms of the actual lumber itself, why is it unusable? What's the issue with the what you turn into carbon smart wood? Why is it someone else's waste?
Great question. So usually when you look at the traditional lumber industry, you're looking at managed forests, even if they are sustainably managed forests, but they are species and trees that are planted, maintained, and cared for to produce as round, as large, and as uniform of a cylinder as possible. So anytime you get outside of that, so a tree growing on your sidewalk to a park to even some nature areas, maybe just outside of town, those are hard to deal with and don't fit into the optimized supply chain that the lumber industry has. So all of that is just more time, more energy, and not worth any of that. So basically, it just gets left to the side,
Hmm.
even though it's beautiful, right? And in that irregularity, what people call defects, we call character, right? It provides a uniqueness and a beauty to wood that you can't get anywhere else.
It reminds me of in another industry, the food industry, the kind of the ugly fruits and vegetables. Absolutely nothing wrong with them, but a tomato that's not a perfect ball or circle, and maybe is a little bit more of an
Mhm.
oval or some other weird like thing sticking out of the side of it. Nothing wrong with it,
Right.
and it will still make amazing tomato juice or a salad. It really doesn't matter. But
Mhm.
yeah, people have this idea that a tomato has to look exactly in a specific way. And if it doesn't fit that,
Mhm.
then basically they just toss it. And it's an incredible waste.
Absolutely. And we use the food industry in that sense and as a comparison point in exactly
Mm,
that same way that we've been cultured to expect uniformity in a natural thing. tomatoes don't look like tomatoes.
Right.
And so the same thing happens with wood, and embracing that variation and that uniqueness rather than shunning it.
And yeah, I mean, I think that that makes a lot of sense. I'd be curious to know how much wood is wasted because of that irregularity. I'm sure there's certainly in the food industry there are numbers. I don't have them in front of me off the top of my head, but would you happen to know
Mhm.
in the timber or lumber industry? I mean, yeah, how much wood is wasted
Yeah,
because of quote unquote defects?
estimates from the EPA and a number of like the U.S. Forest Service range. It's 36 million trees fall in and around cities that aren't used to their best capacity, and that equates to around 46 million tons of material. And those are probably conservative estimates, and those are big numbers to wrap your head around, obviously. But short answer is a lot more than you might think.
Yeah, and I'm guessing based on where you're getting those stats that that's only in the US.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that when we look globally, that number gets much, much bigger.
And so basically what Cambium Carbon and what you and the team are doing is trying to take advantage of all of that material and turning it into something else rather than just having it burned or discarded.
Exactly. And going through this, the software and the material side of things. So not only adding the efficiencies and the processes through the technology to help how quickly and how efficiently can we turn a quote ugly piece of lumber into a usable board of lumber for a furniture company or an end product, but then also making sure that we have the testing and the experimentation and the innovation, that we're doing the best drying process, the best finishing process, the best molding and millwork for that species in that scenario, to ensure not only as much use and
Mhm.
as little waste as possible, but also the most beautiful end product as well.
Yeah. So if we go, so there are two things that you just mentioned, which I'd love to learn more about. First, the technology side, and then that innovation testing process side. So
Mhm.
what is the technology side? How does that work?
Yeah, so our in-house platform called Trace, Traece, is basically that, a tracing tool to not only track from the moment a tree comes down through its processing pipeline, uh, through its end use, uh, but also track the carbon and impact metrics associated with that, and basically bring this material that no one really knows about in broad scopes, right, to the forefront, digitize it and make it accessible to bigger buyers. So you could imagine, like, no one really knew about ugly produce until we started talking about it. And so we started digitizing it and understanding the volume that's
Right.
there. So that's part of our work, is working with these local suppliers across the country who work with this material and leveling them up, connecting them to bigger buyers through this technology.
Gotcha. So, and is that what you're referring to as the regenerative supply chain?
That, to me, that is a part of it.
Okay.
So when we think about a truly regenerative supply chain, as opposed to what we're used to is a point source extraction model, right?
Hmm.
We go to a place, we take a raw material, we ship it to another place, we value process it into something else, maybe ship it to another place for assembly, and then finally maybe ship it to a third place for installation or end use. Each one of those points in that system has an environmental and a social cost that is decoupled or hidden and externalized. When we talk about at Cambium a regenerative supply chain, it's you're sourcing salvaged material from your local areas. So you're diverting waste locally. You're connecting it to local processors. So you're creating local jobs and investing in the infrastructure and people in those communities. And then the third piece of that is that at least 15% of all carbon smart wood sales are reinvested in community tree planting, with a prioritization of communities that need those trees most. And if you take a look at, or if you overlap maps of communities that have been redlined throughout the 19th century, and you overlap them with tree coverage data from today, they map up pretty well. And so to me, that's the regenerative side of it, that not only are we're not looking at net zero, we're actually looking at how do we build the system better every time it operates. And so that
Yeah.
trace piece is a part of it.
So, before we started recording, you mentioned that you're based in Baltimore, and as part of this
Mhm.
regenerative cycle, you're saying that it's all about keeping things local, which I think is crucial. And same thing with the just with the circular supply chain. I think you can have like mini circular uh, kind of supply chains within larger circular supply chains. So,
Mhm.
how does it work if you're working with local suppliers or local um, you know, uh, keeping keeping everything local when the HQ is in Baltimore? Are you basically finding ways to connect using this technology, connect people and suppliers and companies that are local to each other? Is that basically how it's working?
Definitely, that's a big part of it, and
Mm,
how we think of it as a nationally local
okay.
model, that we have these local hubs, right, that are salvaging, that are processing, connecting to bigger buyers, and we build those local regional that infrastructure and those connections facilitated a lot through the platform, as well as face to face, and have build up that the infrastructure across the board, but focusing on those local areas. And the root of that is that, to address, you know listening to some of your other guests on your podcast, right? We have a gigaton level problem, gigatons, right? Plural, that we need to address. That's not going to happen just by us doing this work here in Baltimore. We understand that. Building out the roadmap and testing species, testing process, testing operations here to then scale, we get the local expertise, the local impact, which is the most powerful, scaled across the country, which is there we can get into those volume or those bigger numbers that truly move the needle in a bigger way.
And so on that point, in terms of what you're doing at your R&D facility with the testing and really working on the the carbon smart wood product, I mean, what is happening in the laboratory, and what are you cooking up there?
It's funny you use that that phrase, cooking up. So we basically treat this as the innovation center for salvaged material. What species are we working with? How can we work with them better? What end uses are optimal for those species? And how do we ensure quality and durability in a product over time? And I mentioned the cooking up as an example. So this board right here is thermally modified red oak. Now, you may not know much about trees or wood or red oak in particular, but this does not look like traditional red oak.
Mm,
Red oak is much lighter and it has a reddish tint to it. So right now, actually, no one really likes red oak. It's like not kind of in fashion right now. But we have a ton of red oak, especially here and around Baltimore, other pockets across the country, but no one wants it. So we have this basically like a trash wood that no one wants.
and what
But
and
we've been able to start.
Theo, if I
Go
could
ahead.
just jump in, just so I can understand, where is all this red oak coming from? Why is there so much of it, and if no one wants it?
Yeah, so red oak is a common species planted in and around cities. So it's,
I
of your
see.
staple trees that are planted. We just have a lot of it, and it's, I mean, especially here in the Mid Atlantic, it's a native species that grows naturally on its own.
Hmm.
So from urban areas to even like natural areas outside of cities, there's a bounty of red oak.
And then you get it because I'm just trying to piece all everything together because I really want to hear what
Sure.
you're cooking up.
Yeah.
You have all of this red oak because there's construction or an old tree falls down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this happens on a weekly basis, and you're just keep collecting all this red oak. Is that how it happens, or
Basically, and we call it, we use the 4 Ds for tree removal. So it's disease, decay, disaster, and development. So trees are
gotcha?
coming down for all sorts of reasons.
That's
We
clear.
don't want them to come down. If they can stay in the ground, fantastic. If they do have to come down, we want to put them to their best use. So that's basically, to
Makes
your point,
sense.
that's how we're getting these species.
And so there's a ton of this red oak. No one wants it. And so you're cooking up thermally modified red oak, which you were just showing. And I cut you off probably at the
Yeah.
most interesting
No,
point.
no, no. It's great context. So we're working with a group called Arbor Wood Co. That does this process, and basically it's an extra step of drying material. So any lumber, you're working on a tabletop, the lumber that's used for that is dried to around 8 to 10% moisture content, right? So that means 8 to 10% of that material is water. That ensures that there's not going to be any movement or warping or cracking in that material. Thermally modified wood goes through a separate process that takes that down to around 4 or 5% moisture content. And through that, we are changing the chemical structure of the material. So you're actually cooking off the sugars and the starches in the wood that usually bugs and fungi or mold, like, they feast on, right? So normally red oak is not a good outdoor material, but after this process, it becomes rot resistant, weather resistant, in a way that only competes, or that only, up until this point, was only satisfied by either tropical hardwoods imported from the Amazon or West Africa or Central America, pressure treated lumber, which is basically chemically pumping chemicals into wood to make it last outside, or a plastic composite of some sort. So we're really excited about this as an alternative, because we're turning a wasted wood that we have an abundance of into this carbon negative alternative to these kind of standard market options. And all of this testing, so we work with this group, Arbor Wood Co, that I mentioned, bring it in here, and we're making decking, we're making siding, we're making tabletops, outdoor furniture out of this. So we're basically putting this material to the limit. We have a storage container outside that pieces have been sitting on there for 12 months now, to make sure that over time, even as it weathers in harsh, hot, humid Baltimore summers, it stands up. And so really putting these species through the paces, and thermally modified wood is just one example of ways that we're leveraging our technical expertise and our capacity here to bring a new material to market, in a way that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, and first of all, I think there's probably no better place to test weathering than in a city like Baltimore, where, like you said, hot, humid in the summer, freezing in the winter, and it's just brutal. So if it can withstand the Baltimore weather conditions, it can probably withstand anything at this point. But what I love about what you said, in terms of using the thermally modified red oak instead of either other species or other composites, is that, or like plastic, for instance, is that by doing that, what you're really doing is reducing demand for other wood. So, if we're talking about the 46 million tons of material that's estimated that you mentioned earlier, I mean, that's 46 million. If you're able to use all of that and salvage it, that's 46 million tons of wood that you don't need to get from the Amazon, for instance, or from somewhere else. And I mean, that's really crucial, considering the rate of deforestation that's happening around the world, especially in these critical biodiversity and carbon sequestered areas. I'm curious to know something. You mentioned that the wood is carbon negative, and of course, the name of the wood itself is called Carbon Smart. How is the wood carbon negative?
So when you think of, and this has been popular in the building environment space, embodied carbon, right? All the emissions, all the pieces that go into building a building, whether that's the flooring, the fixtures, the structure, et cetera. And so when we look at the process of Carbon Smart wood, so if we're getting this material locally and we're transporting it and processing it, you have a smaller carbon impact just from transportation. That's a big part of it. The embodied carbon, this is just stored carbon, right? This is a great way, nature's way of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and preserving it for a long time.
Yeah,
it definitely takes time. There's no arguing that, and but it's here, and if done well, it's going to stay here for our lifetimes, if not longer. And so, from transportation to the material itself, the life cycle assessment of the machines that we use and all those pieces, combined with our 15% of profits going back into tree planting. So we basically create this holistic report card or LCA, life cycle assessment of the material, that shows that our material is not only a better carbon alternative, but in the long scope of the replanting and the whole process, actually creates and leads to that regenerative supply chain.
Mm. Yeah, I see your point. And if we move over to something you just mentioned about the 15% profits going back to tree planting, and you touched on this very briefly, what is the tree planting exactly that you're funding?
Great question. And so here in Baltimore, I'll use a local example. So we work with the Baltimore Tree Trust, which is a local nonprofit that works with the city and has a workforce development component that basically that we work with them to understand the best species to plant in the right places at the right time to ensure longevity and survival. So it's not as, we don't get the big planting numbers as we go off to a hillside and plant a bunch of saplings, but we see per dollar invested, we get a much more impactful tree for people in those communities. Not, addressing urban heat island, addressing air quality, addressing mental health, all those pieces. But one of our key goals is working with these local groups, as opposed to us coming in and saying, hey, we think you should plant trees here. They have the connections, they have the context, they know where these trees should go and the best way to do them. And also, I'm really excited about the fact that our last kind of wave of plantings instead were used to train, I think it was 8 local arborists to become ISA certified. So looking holistically at this solution, if we're planting a bunch of trees, but we don't have people who can go and take care of them or aren't trained to do that, then again, we're focusing on, one thing too much.
Yeah.
And so we really rely on these local partners to be a big help there.
And so the Baltimore Tree Trust, and the reason I'm asking about them is because really through your funding, this is the work that you're supporting. They focus on, it sounds like, replanting and training people in terms of trees within cities, or within
Correct.
the city of Baltimore specifically.
In and around,
Okay.
basically wherever there is land, in and around Baltimore City, Baltimore County, which is just the county surrounding it, to find spaces to land.
I think that's really cool, and I think there's a lot of organizations that do planting, like you said, hillsides or massive restoration projects in the middle of the rainforest, or whatever the case may be, and not enough attention is really getting onto planting trees and taking care of trees within cities. Those trees are working so hard. It's a stressful condition to be surrounded by cement and cars and dogs peeing all over you all the time. There's like it's a lot to be a tree in that place. And to your point, these trees provide so many amazing resources to the people, whether it's reducing the amount of heat and thereby reducing the amount of AC that's required to run, or cleaning up the air, because they suck in air particulate matter and you can actually wipe it off the leaves because that's what they're doing. Mental health there, and I think this is what you're talking about earlier with redlining communities. There's a lot of studies which I've at least anecdotally heard about, saying that the more trees there are in a community, the better off the people are, and also actually the price of property goes up the more trees there are on the street. So there's a lot of good that comes from trees, and it's a very inexpensive and efficient and effective way to solve a lot of the issues that we're seeing that cities have. So I think it's awesome that you're picking that as your as the way to give back, rather than doing something a little bit more like just reforesting a hillside.
Sure.
So it's really cool. What was the moment you realized that this was the work that you want to do? If there was a moment.
Good question. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Cool.
And so very different of a landscape than here in Baltimore. Mainly is which is that it's a desert out there. And I can remember every year there were, ads on the radio, or people we talked about at school that, we're in a drought. We have to conserve water. We have to do X, Y, Z. So from a young age, this idea of sustainability and being aware of our impact on the natural world was front of mind. In the winters, my mom only used enough heat to keep the pipes from freezing. We drank a lot of tea and we brought out blankets. In the summers, we opened windows and didn't use AC. So as much as I maybe didn't like that as a kid, that always put me, I knew I was going to work on sustainability in some capacity. And in high school, middle school and high school, I met Ben Christensen, who's one of our co-founders and our CEO. And we started scheming, and there was always a thread of, oh, what if we start something together? Like, what could it be like? And we knew it was going to be around sustainability. And then I went to college and dug into on the business and sort of economics, behavioral decision-making side of things, and around this question of how do we make something that's good for people and good for the planet? Like in our world, now they're much more, in tune, or at least people are aware of those things. But growing up, it always felt so different. It's like, no, you can't have a good business that is also sustainable and kind of holistically sustainable in that way. And that question initially took off into food systems. So agriculture, urban food access, food deserts, things like that. And then sort of an opportunity came up, and Ben and I started working, and then we worked with Marissa, our third co-founder, and we found this gap of, hey, we have this incredible natural resource that we're just wasting. We spend tons and tons of money planting trees, taking care of trees, and then we're throwing them away, basically. And it just started to grow from there. So it's a little bit of a pivot from food into lumber or wood or resource use, but still in the same vein of connecting with the environment around us, slowing down and understanding, connecting to the process of how things get from this natural state to things that we use every day, not taking that for granted in a world where we can order something and get it tomorrow. The connection to the process, the people, the place where all that connects has been a theme sort of throughout in a lot of different ways. So I guess there maybe wasn't one point. It's just been a slow build of evolving, and it has led me here.
Yeah, well, that's a really cool story, and it's wonderful to hear that it started from such an early age, and I mean that means that it's like truly a part of who you are, and I imagine that you take that philosophy and really integrate it into the work you're doing at Cambium. So, with that in mind, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of potential and opportunity here. So, what's next for you and the team?
Well, in the immediate term, I mean, we have kind of going back to the tech side with Trace, and the material side with here in our R&D facility, is continuing to push the envelopes there. We are working with companies who want to integrate this material into their supply chains, whether furniture companies, property developers and construction companies. Anyone who uses wood could have an avenue to utilize carbon smart wood in some capacity. So finding the right folks, getting into the right rooms to have those conversations will be always a big focus for us, and getting the word out there. A lot of people don't know that we have this material out right in our backyards that we're not using. So really building the brand around carbon smart wood and getting people excited about this, as you're talking about, this holistic sort of movement, this regenerative supply chain that we're building. And then beyond that, once we build a supply chain out of wood and we have the technology that underpins that, expanding that to other wasted resources that we have all around us is, I won't say it's easy, but it's relative. It'll be our next jump. Whether that's metal, whether that's exactly, and creating these true nationally local systems to enable sourcing and impact locally and also at scale. So those are sort of near, medium, and long term, next steps for us.
Yeah, well, it's really exciting. And I mean, the opportunity is endless. And I imagine that, just focusing on wasted wood, it will keep you more than busy, which is, I suppose, good and bad in that, it's great that there's
Sure.
a lot of opportunity. It's unfortunate that there's so much opportunity because it means there's a lot of waste. But I'm really, really excited to hear that you're working on this, because I wasn't even aware of the amount of material wasted just from, the 4Ds, as you mentioned. And clearly there's so much we can do, and I'm sure this is happening in other industries with other materials as well, just like you've said. So best of luck to you and the team. I mean, it's amazing to hear about how you're approaching this, and how you're really taking advantage of um, an amazing material that is otherwise just seen as probably a nuisance. So for anyone who's interested in learning more about carbon smart wood, about trace technology, about you and the team, or just Cambium Carbon in general, where's the best place for people to go in terms of websites and social media?
Yeah, follow us on social media. Instagram, LinkedIn are big. You can visit our website. My email, Theo, Theo, at cambiumcarbon.com. Happy to chat. Shoot me an email. And yeah, LinkedIn, website, email. Those are the places to go.
Amazing, and we'll include all the links in the show notes for anyone who wants to join. But Theo, if you wouldn't mind just saying the website for anyone who's listening and can't look at the show notes. Best place
Absolutely.
to go.
That is www.cambiumcarbon.com, CAMBIUM carbon. And then our social handles are at Cambium Carbon as well.
Great. It's nice when it's all consistent and easy to remember. Well,
Yeah.
Theo, thank you so much for your time, for going through this. I think, like I was just saying, the challenge that you're working on is big. It's really exciting, and there's a lot of opportunity here to make what sounds like a huge impact on a lot of different industries in one fell swoop, which is amazing. So, best of luck to you and the team, and yeah, thanks so much for all the work that you're doing. Looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.